back to Jung. He's a visionary thinker. Now, my client, I said, she could lucid dream, and she could ask her dream characters what they wanted and what they were trying to communicate to her. So that was pretty interesting. That happened spontaneously, had nothing to do with me. I mean, I'm interested in dreams, and many of my clients are great dreamers, especially the creative ones, because I think it's a hallmark of creativity to have vivid dreams and to be able to remember them. But that was a faculty that was natural to her. Jung had this other client at one point, and she had a variety of fears, and she had this dream that she told me, and she was walking down a beach, and on the side of the beach, up a dune, a small dune, there was this old man with a snake, a big python, and there's a crowd around him, and she was walking by the snake handler and the snake and the crowd, and she didn't want to have anything to do with him. He was sort of showing people this snake, and she told me that dream, and I thought, well, you know, you probably need to go see that snake. And so I relaxed her. It's a quasi-hypnotic technique, and it's very straightforward. Hypnosis is generally nothing but pronounced relaxation, although you have to be susceptible to hypnosis to actually fall into a hypnotic trance as a consequence of being relaxed. I just relaxed her. I had her breathe deeply and pay attention to different parts of her body and just relax her muscles one by one, essentially, so that she could concentrate. And then I told her we'd play with the dream a little bit. It's a Jungian technique. I said, well, so call the dream image to mind, which she could do quite well. I said, okay, so let's explore it. It's like pretend play. You know, if you're a kid and you're pretend playing, you don't exactly direct the game, right? You play the game. So it's partly your direction, obviously, because you're the player, but the thing also happens spontaneously of its own accord. And you could think about that as a dialogue between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind in some sense. It's a developmental dialogue. It's not a fun game if you just direct it. It's only a fun game if you're inviting and something is welling up as a consequence. It's the same thing that happens when you're engaged in some kind of artistic or literary production. If it's all top down, you know, if you're forcing it, then it's propaganda, it's empty. What you want to sort of is put yourself in a receptive state of mind, in an imaginative state of mind, and it's sort of half you and half nature itself manifesting itself in your creative imagination. And that was the sort of state that we were striving for. And I asked her when she was relaxed, I said, well, what do you think about the snake handler? And she said, well, he's probably a charlatan and he's just there trying to impress the crowd and to show off. And she was afraid to go up there because she thought people would push her towards the snake and she'd have to touch it. And so there was a fear of the crowd issue going on there too. And I said, well, just look, go up there, but do it under these conditions. Is that, you know, if people get pushy, what are you going to tell them? And so we figured out something. He said, look, you just tell them that, you know, you want to look at the snake at your own pace and that you don't need any encouragement or help, and it would be good if you were just left alone. So that enabled her to defend herself. So she was afraid that the crowd would push her to do something that she didn't want to do. That was part of the theme of the dream. So anyway, she eventually climbed the dune in her imagination and went into the crowd, and the crowd turned out to be quite welcoming and not hostile and not pushy, which isn't what you'd expect, right? Because you'd think the crowd would have reacted in accordance with her fears since it was her fantasy. But that's the thing about fantasies, they have this autonomous quality. But the crowd was welcoming and not hostile, and it turned out that the snake handler wasn't a charlatan. He was just an old guy who had this snake, and he was out there just showing it to people because he thought it was a cool thing, and that maybe it was good for people to come and look at a snake. And so she got close enough to the snake to touch it. And so I'm telling you that because I want you to understand a bit more about what Jung was trying to do. And so he wrote these books, notebooks that haven't been published yet, called the Black Books. And the Black Books are the documentation of his experiments with his imagination. And what he would do is daydream, like a child daydreams. He regained that faculty, although I think with Jung it was a faculty that had never really disappeared. And he had figures of imagination that came to him that he could speak with. And he spoke with these figures of imagination and documented that over a very long period of time. And that was eventually distilled into a book called the Red Book, which was published about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was a book that Jung regarded as the central source from which all his inspiration emerged. It was sort of, the way it looks to me is that we embody a lot of information in our action, right? And our action has developed as a consequence of imitating other people. And not only the people around us, but of course the people around us imitated the people who came before them, and those people imitated the people who came before them, and so on, so far back that it's as far back as you can go. And so you embody these patterns of behavior that are extremely informative, that you don't understand, that are a consequence of collective imitation across the centuries. And so then those patterns can become manifest as figures of the imagination. And those figures of imagination are the distillations of patterns of behavior. And so as the distillations of patterns of behavior, they have content. And it's not you, that content. You could even think about it as content that's evolved, although it's culturally transmitted. It's content that's evolved. And so these figures of the imagination can reveal the structure of reality to you. And that's what happened with Jung. And that's what he described in the Red Book. And that was what permeated his psychology, a psychology that was based on the presupposition that the fundamental archetypal structures of religious belief were not pathological, not deceitful, not protective in some delusional sense against the fear of death, but quite the contrary. The very stories that enabled us to move forward as confident human beings in the face of chaos itself. And it's conceivable, I think perhaps probable, that nothing more important conceptually happened in the 20th century than that. Because it was the first time post-Enlightenment that a rapprochement between the intellect and the underlying religious archetypal substructure occurred. You have in the capacious intellect of Jung, and the same thing happened to some degree with Piaget, the religious domain and the factual domain were brought back together. And the fact of Jung's enduring and increasing popularity and influence, I would say, is a direct consequence of that. Now, some of his work was spun off into the New Age, and the New Age is a very optimistic and naive movement. And it's predicated on the idea that you can do nothing, say, but follow your bliss, and that will take you ever higher to enlightenment. And that's not the Jungian idea at all. The Jungian idea is that what you most need will be found where you least want to look. So there's this story, King Arthur. There's this story of King Arthur. They're all in a round table, right? King Arthur and his knights, they're all equals. They're all superordinate, but they're all equals. And they go off to look for the Holy Grail. And the Holy Grail is the container of the redemptive substance, whatever that is. It might be the cup that Christ used at the Last Supper, or it might be a chalice that was used to capture his blood on the cross, right, when he was pierced by a sword. The stories differ, but that's the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail is lost. That's the redemptive substance, and the knights of King Arthur go off to search for the Holy Grail, but they don't know where to look. So where do you look when you don't know where to look for something you need desperately but have lost? Well, each of the knights goes into the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And that's Jungian psychoanalysis in a nutshell. It's like that which you fear and avoid, that which you hold in contempt, that which disgusts you and that you avoid. That's the gateway to what you need to know. There's nothing New Age about that. That's for sure.